Yeah, so um, this is going to be the first episode of my of what I used to have back in the days in Brooklyn called the Chronicles. And by the way, if you're not aware who I am from Brooklyn, New York, by way of Boston, Massachusetts. So I'm a Yankee. I'm an American, whatever you want to call me. New to the city, been here for 2 years. I'm a DJ, producer, uh, yeah, record label owner. Yeah, and I'm here trying to add on to the culture in Berlin, Germany. And yeah, so my idea for the Chronicles comes from my years of experience, 20 plus years of working in the music industry, and traveling the world with my former partner Khan. So you may know of me from Khan and Amir, doing stuff like that, and from my time at Fat Beats Distribution, where I was VP of Sales for a long time. I ran the Wax Poetics Records label from the beginning until 2010, and I've done a bunch of other different things that have led me to where I am now. And so this is just a chronicles of, and that's with a K, chronicles of my life. I think it's an interesting story. It's kind of like, these sessions will be like me sitting in a bar with you telling you these stories, and which if you know me, I do that a lot. I have a story pretty much for a lot of different things because I've been blessed to experience a lot of different things in my life. So, with that being said, I'm going to go into a little bit about myself. Moving from Boston, Massachusetts, in the States to New York City in 1995, the summer of 1995, and I moved with two other roommates who were of the Vinyl Reanimators, and that would be Joe Mansfield, who produced the first and I believe the second Edo G albums, DJ Shame from Worcester, Massachusetts, and Sean C from Boston, or from the Cape, and then via Boston as well. So Sean C, and myself, we moved to New York City in 1995, and as you can imagine, it was an apartment full of records. And they were a production crew. They got to New York and they kind of hit the ground running because they knew a lot of people in the music industry at the time. And I was there because I was in grad school. I was trying to get a PhD in sociology, if you can imagine that. No, unless you knew me back then, you wouldn't know that. So while they're tapping out beats on an S950 or whatever, and they're doing stuff with the Edo G. They did the first Edo G EP, They're Acting. It was recorded there. I remember, Ed doing vocals in Sean C's room, and all the cuts and everything else. And while they're doing that, I'm in there trying to read and study, Max Weber and Karl Marx and all this other stuff that, I had to read at the time. And pretty much about after 6 months of me doing that, I had to give up, man, because, like Stretch Armstrong is coming by the house, and all these famous MCs, and DJ Eclipse, everybody wanted to meet them. They wanted to meet people, and so it was really hard for me to do work. And I'm such a at the time I was definitely a big hip hop head, so I decided to drop out of grad school to the chagrin of my parents. They weren't really mad at me for doing that. I was the first one to go to grad school in my family, and I got a job. Really an internship at Big Beat Records. If you know any hip hop labels, Big Beat Records was the home of the Artifacts, Real Live, Double X Posse, even records from Sybil, Changing Faces and stuff like that, and I was an intern. I was an intern for Mike Karen. Mike Karen is, the guy that rediscovered or discovered, Twister, went on to do bigger things. I think he's now the vice president of A&R at Warner Brothers. And my boy Reef, Rob Tulo, excuse me, Rob. Rob Tulo, Reef, he was working with the Artifacts and stuff like that. And, so I got to know the Artifacts, and I got to know Real Live, K-Def and Larry O, and a bunch of other people from just working there, because I was a guy that we need you to take this letter or whatever over to Atlantic Records, or we need you to do this, and we need you to do that. So I did that for a while, and I got exposed to a lot of different people. And then when I decided that was not really cutting it for me, I decided to start, working for a lot of these independent labels, like True Criminal Records, from Street Smarts and a bunch of other labels. I almost started working for Dolo Records, which is, Stretch Armstrong's, one of his labels that he had back in the days, and he had a partner that I was talking to, and, I was really trying to get down with them. And then my roommate was like, man, you gotta start paying rent. And so he was like, we just put out the Elderhead Toucher record, which was also recorded in in our apartment. He's like, we're selling it to Fat Beats Distribution, and I knew Fat Beats from the store, in LES and Lower East Side. Had been going there buying records and stuff like that, going to see Rock Raider and X-Men and everybody else do their routines and MC battles. Seeing Kanye at Fat Beats and stuff like that. Rhyming when he just had a backpack, and nobody really knew who Kanye was. So I went and interviewed for a job as as a domestic salesperson, because all of those big records that you guys now really value, from J Live or whoever it may be, even Mos Def and Quali and all those guys, none of those records were really selling in the States like that. They were selling over here in Europe and in Japan. And so we were shipping pallets of records. When I say pallets of records, I'm talking about thousands of 12 inches to Japan and Europe. So I was brought in to trying to, open up America to this music. And so when I did, I was relatively successful at it, because being a record collector, I knew a lot of record stores around the country, because I had traveled around the country, going to these different record stores. So I would call them up. This is before you could do a Google search. So you look in the phone book, and you would just figure out or call information, and figure out which record stores are taking in vinyl and taking in hip hop. And it was hard in the beginning, because most people couldn't even pronounce Mos Def's name. And I remember calling different stores and being like, hey, I got the new Universal Magnetic 12 inch, and people, by this guy named Mos Def, and they're like, Mos Def? And I'm like, no, Mos. You know what I mean? I knew Mos from being around in Brooklyn at the time, at different spots, like the, man, I can't even remember the Brooklyn Moon Cafe, I believe it's called, and it's one of those places where they used to do a lot of poetry. And I remember seeing him in early 95, when I first got to the city, doing something there. I knew him and Quali and a bunch of other guys, being at the New Rican Cafe in LES, seeing them, just perform and do whatever. And, so when I'm on the phone trying to sell this stuff, it was pretty hard, because, at the time it was all about, Puffy, Biggie, and all those records were great. No knock on them, but, it was just hard to squeeze in a lot of these other cats. And, after, really working, a lot of different promo labels, this is one of the stories that I said on my IG page, is that, before I started doing all of that, when I started working for True Criminal Records, they would give us, vinyl, and then we would have to go to these different parties or whatever and hand out vinyl to all the DJs, make sure you get it to the DJ, whoever it is in the DJ booth. And so that was, that was a hustle for a lot of us back in the days, to get into these parties at the Palladium or wherever else. It's like, yo, I'm working for promo for so-and-so, I should be on the list, or you just flim-flam your way in the party, without having to pay to get in there. You can't really do that, obviously, anymore, but that's what you used to do. And one of the cats, before I say his name, that used to, roll with me and a bunch of other cats doing this, one time in 1996, we went to the Zulu Nation anniversary party, and we were standing in line. It was a long line. And, we finally get to the security, and the security's like, what's your name? Is your name on the list? That kind of thing. And we're like, yeah. And he comes to my boy. He's like, what's your name? My boy goes, pain in the ass. He's like, what? He said, pain in the ass. And I swear to you, the bouncer, security dude, cocked back and punched him so hard that he knocked him out. And the dude's laying on the ground. We're asking him, can we bring him into the bathroom? water on his face, try to wake him up and, mat down the blood and all this other stuff. And the dude kept saying to me, he was like, yo, what happened, man? I was like, don't worry about it, man. You got knocked out, but we're going to take care of you. 5 seconds later, yo, what happened to me? Yo, dude, you got knocked the fuck out. Relax. And this person, as you heard, I said, his name is Pain in the Ass. Now, if you remember all the earlier Jay-Z albums, there was a dude on there named Pain in the Ass that was yelling about, I'm gonna bring the pain and this and that and the other. And he became like this, on the interludes of all these Jay-Z records, he kind of became big. Me and that dude used to roll back in the days with backpacks of records, rolling and scheming and getting into parties and stuff, working for different labels and stuff. And so, that was before I started working at Fat Beats. I was doing all of that stuff, and that's kind of how I met Khan, because at the same label, True Criminal, he gave me a bunch of stuff, and I went up to Boston, and I went to a friend of mine's record store called Biscuit Head Records. Went up to my man Bruno. I'm not sure you'll probably ever hear this, but I'm in the store, and I'm talking to him about, kind of the same thing about, DJs and stuff like that, the complaints that all of us DJs have about each other or whatever. And Khan's in there, and and he's like, yeah, I can't help but to overhear you. I agree with you. And so we just started talking and everything. And I'm with my homegirl who's from Boston, Janice, and we start talking, and I'm like, well, I'm about to bounce, man. You need to ride somewhere. And he was like, yeah, So we get in the car, and this is when cars still had cassette decks. So as soon as we get in the car, the music starts playing, and I had, made just a cassette of like different breaks and stuff that I had, and I forgot what record was playing. And Khan was like, "Yo, you into records like that?" I was like, "Yeah," And he was like, "Word?" I was like, "Yeah," and I was surprised he was too, because I thought I knew pretty much a lot of the record collectors in Boston, and we just kind of hit it off. And I went by his place, and we hung out, and then the rest is history. And then you get the on tracks and the off tracks and everything else that we did together. And that was pretty much really like before I started working at Fat Beats. And then when I started working at Fat Beats, I told the story about Big L. Big L used to come through Fat Beats a lot. I can't say that I knew him well. I did know him. He whenever he would see me, he would always say, "What's up?" He was a cool brother. He was quiet. He was one of the illest MCs, definitely. So I told this story about how, like a few months before he passed away, a friend of mine, Neil, that used to work at Fat Beats, he was doing like promo and stuff like that for DITC, and working with them and working with Big L. And so I had a friend from RER magazine in France at the time, and he was like, I'd like to do a show with L. Would you see if he's interested? So I talked to Neil, who talked to Big L, and I was like, yo, tell him, man, I might have some money for him and, a show, because I don't know if he's ever been to France, but, it could be a good thing for him. And, they came to an agreement. I hooked him up. They came to an agreement, and, L got half the money. And about 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the show, L called Neil, and he was like, yo, man, I'm not doing the show. And I'm like, what? What does he mean you're not doing the show? He's got to do the show, man. The dude paid him half up front. Like, that's crazy. And I was like, can you talk to him? Like, what's up? And he was like, L said, I'm not doing the show. Now, I don't know what was going on at the time. I think there was something going on, unfortunately, that, caused him not to do the show. But I had to go back to this guy and be like, you know what? We can't do this. He's not going to do the show. And not only is he not going to do the show, but you're not going to get that money back. Obviously, this dude went off. I knew he was going to curse at me. That comes with the territory. I have thick skin, But at the end of the conversation, man, he, after him going off, he said something like, and I cursed Big L to die. And I was like, whoa, dude, like, that's kind of, you're taking it beyond 10, but I didn't think anything of it after being, pretty much pissed. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, we get, before, we at Fat Beat pretty much knew before, most of the world found out that Big L had passed, that he was killed. And when we found out, I was like, yo, this is really spooky that, this, like, I'm not a superstitious person, but I felt like, wow, that, when you speak truth to power, or you speak words that, and then you put them out in the air and they become true, that's kind of crazy. And so I thought about, me and Neil thought about this dude, and I was like, yo, man, I can't wait to get this dude on the phone and give him a piece of my mind, man, because I was upset, dude. I was really upset because L was coming hopefully with some, new great material. And like I said, he was one of the best MCs out there, you know what I'm saying? And he was just a real good dude, so obviously you don't want to see anything like that happen to anybody, you know? So, I go back to this dude, I tell him all of this other stuff, and then after he says all of that, and I tell him, about the death of Big L, and then I think he either heard about it or I either called him. I can't remember which one it was, but when we got on the phone, I just gave him a piece of my mind. I was like, yo, dude, don't you ever do anything like that ever again, man. Don't do something like that because you're gonna regret it. You know what I mean? I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And the dude started crying on the phone, and at the time, man, I'm young. I'm in my late 20s, and I'm just like, I'm not hearing it, dude. You just wish death on one of my favorite MCs. Like, that's just, or, it doesn't even have to be my favorite MC. You just wish death on anybody. That's just whack. You know what I mean? And so I always remember that with Big L, because I just feel like, just a great person and a great, MC cut before his time, and then, so stuff like that happened, early on, like some of the records that I did, that I was passed, because after a while when Fat Beats, the ownership saw that, I was a good hustler and I was bringing in accounts, and, a couple of times I was like, salesperson of the month and stuff like that, they started trusting me with bringing in certain, projects. So a few of the projects, like one of them was Crumb Snatcher, because the record was being produced by these two Dominican guys who lived in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and they had a record store. I don't remember the name of the record store to save my life right now, but I used to sell records to them, and they were like, yo, we got this Crumb Snatcher record that Primo produced. And I was like, okay. I had never heard of Crumb Snatcher, but then when I heard the record, I was like, yo, we need to have this record. And so that happened. I did the first Chaotix records from Houston. What's up to my man, the R. I am the R who produced that record. So different things like that I was involved with. Later on, when I became like the person in charge of like bringing in a lot of projects, one of the things that I brought in, as I said in my IG story, was I did the first two Frank and Dank records that Dilla or JD produced. Dilla came by. I think it was in late 1999. He came with James Portman, one of the Soul Aquarians. He came with my man Ramos. And if anybody out there in the music land or just in the land period knows anything about music, you heard the name Ramos, you either feel kind of, like I love him, that's my man, or like I can't stand that dude. But, he's my dude. We went through a lot together, so he came with Dilla, he was working with Dilla. He was working, to build his label McNasty, which he had at the time, and Dilla came through and he played, he played those two Frank and Dank records, and he played Fuck the Police. And, so like, he played the two Frank and Dank records first, and I was like, yo, I'll take them, and I'm not gonna say how much he asked for in advance, but this is back when you could get a nice big advance for a 12-inch record. And then he played the Fuck the Police, and I was like, yo, I want all of them. And he was like, he wanted to, he obviously knew that was the bigger of the three. And so my boss was like, I can't afford to get all three. And I was like, well, can we just switch out one of the Frank and Dank records, and can I take one of the Frank and Dank records and that one? And he was just like, you gotta take all three. And my boss was like, that ain't happening. So I lost on it, and the demo cassette tape used to sit like in our chill room for like a long time with a bunch of other demos that we had. And then one day when I went to go look for it, I was like, yo, what happened to that cassette? Because I wanted to like listen to it again and maybe revisit trying to put it out. And there was a person that used to work with us that, wasn't working with us anymore. And he went to go work for Up Above Records. And then all of a sudden, the record comes out through Up Above. And I'm like, that's what happened to that demo. Because that's the only way he or anybody from Up Above would even heard that record. Because I know Dilla didn't go to them for that record. He probably never even heard of Up Above at the time. Maybe he did. I don't know. But that's how that record got through my hands. And that's one of the records that to this day, that I kick myself about. I should have really pushed, my boss at Fat Beats to put that out. But you win some, you lose some. You know what I mean? I started working with Alchemist. For a long time. He still has a label called ALC. And early on when he first did his record, I gave him a P&D. We pressed and distributed his records. One of the records that I really remember was the Big Daddy Kane record that he did. And I remember working with him and his lawyer. His lawyer was like a big time music industry lawyer. Now at Fat Beats, we were, I wouldn't say we were a huge company, but we were big enough. But at the same time, we still, if we didn't have to, we wouldn't spend money on the lawyers. So I would have to negotiate with big time lawyers. And that's how I learned how to negotiate, contracts and stuff, because I had to learn. I was thrown to the fire, you know what I mean? And so I'll never forget one day I'm on the phone and he's like, I think Alchemist wanted like $10,000 or $15,000 for that 12-inch as an advance, and I was like, yo, I said I love Alchemist, and this is a great song, man, but I tell him I wish him the best. We can't do this. We can't afford this record, and my philosophy always back then is like, if you decide to not do a record, you should be okay with it, especially if it doesn't put you out of business. If it doesn't put you out of business and you still can go on and be, a great business and still sell other records, then you got to be comfortable and be like, you know what, even if that record does well or whatever else, you got to be able to walk away from it, And so I walked away from it. And I told his lawyer, I was like, hey, I think his name was Randy Cutler or something like that. He was a lawyer for Gangstar too. And I told him, I was like, yo, I can't do the record. And, tell Alchemist, I said, good luck. And then about a week later, he comes back and he was like, yo, I'll do it for like, 5,000 or whatever. And I was like, see, that just further proves my point. You just got to stick to your guns, you know what I mean? And the record ended up, selling a lot. So not only did he make money on advance, but he also made a good amount of money on the back end, which, anybody who's in the music industry, back end money is very rarely seen in the music industry. But that's one of the things I can say that we prided ourselves at Fat Beats is that, we used to say you can talk to Bobito, you can talk to all these different labels, that have been doing records with us for a long time, and they'll tell you that they've been getting their back end money, and it's been sustainable for them, and they've actually made some really good money out of it, So, there's that story. I also, at the time, most people don't really remember, but Fat Beats Distribution, we were the exclusive distributor for Rawkus Vinyl, and that started in 1997, and I believe it ended in 2000. And when it ended, it was like a bad breakup between the two of us. And we made a lot of money from them, and they made a lot of money from us. So like, I'll give you an example. Like when the Common 12-inch 1999 came out, we were the ones that distributed that to the world, the 12-inch at least. So our pre-orders, me running the sales team at the time, we had 30,000 pre-orders of a 12-inch, right? So before I faxed over, and this is again when you have to fax, this is a long time ago, so 1999, you're faxing stuff, you're not really actually emailing purchase orders to people. I mean, I guess you could, but we were still in the ancient, times, I guess. And so before I could do that, I had to pass the purchase order by my boss, and he was like, "Are you crazy, dude? First of all, where are we gonna fit 30,000 12-inches in our warehouse? And do you really actually have sales for that, pre-orders for that?" And I was like, dude, not only do I have pre-orders for that, but those records are gonna come in the same day and leave the same day. And that's exactly what they did. Is I had to get my sales team to go out there and pack their own orders because the warehouse staff was overwhelmed. they're reeling in pallets of 12 inches and then reeling the same thing out like a couple of hours later. You know what I mean? And so like people don't understand. Like people come to me and be like, well, I sold like 5,000 12 inches. I'm like, dude, that's nothing. That's a drop in the bucket from what we used to do at Fat Beats, man. When we got to the point where we were only selling 5,000 12 inches, we were depressed. Like, oh my God, like what is going on? I'll give you another example. Like the Dilated People's first album. I think it was I want to say Triple Optics, but I could be wrong. But it was a triple vinyl record, and we had 10,000 pre-orders for that, and we were disappointed. We were like, yo, what's going on, man? Like, we're falling off. I mean, they all went out the same day, and we sold a lot more than that, but we were so used to like 20,000, 30,000 pre-orders and stuff, you know what I mean? And we started noticing that, like, wow, is there like a change in the market or something like that, early on? And this is like, I think in 2000 or 2001, somewhere around there, so we were selling a lot of records, and it was no problem for us at that time because we had all the right, retail accounts, not only just in America, but from all over the world. For those in Germany, we had, HHV, Groove Attack, and all the other great, record stores in Germany, we were selling to at the time. And, they were heavy supporters of what we did. And so when we lost Raucous, I heard this rumor that Peanut Butter Wolf was leaving New Groove Alliance, which was his first distribution deal. And, I guess he was unhappy with them. And, Wolf and I had, vaguely knew each other. And I reached out to my boy, Egon, because Egon, he's from Connecticut, and he was living in New York, and that's how we used to go record shopping and all that other stuff together. So I knew him. And I believe he was the one that, gave me Wolf's number. And so I called Wolf up and I was like, I'm gonna fly to LA. I'm gonna take you to dinner. We're gonna meet. I'd like to talk to you about switching to Fat Beats instead of whoever else you may be thinking of. And that's exactly what I did. I flew to LA on my own dime, and I took him to dinner, and I convinced him to sign an exclusive vinyl distribution deal with us that lasted until from like, I believe that was 1999 or 2000 until a couple of years ago. So, he was with Fat Beats for like 18 years. And, I was very, very happy that he did that because immediately he started selling records. But as a DJ, as a record collector, I knew that was going to happen, man. He was putting out good stuff. He had a good ear. And, when things got too hectic for him, he hired Egon, and that's how Egon started working with him. And I remember Egon calling me, he's like, yo, I'm working with Wolf now. I was like, thank God somebody's working with him, because he's like a space case. You can't even get him on the phone sometimes. It's like I understand he wants to be the artist. He needs somebody who is actually going to be the label person. So that's what, that was about. And, I also did the first, I believe it was the first Sharon Jones LP on Daptone. I remember when Gabe and Neil came to me and they wanted us to distribute the record. I think this is the one that came out in 2002, Dap Dippin'. And this is my first encounter with doing a 180 proof record with heavy stock jackets and stuff like that. And that's what they wanted. And back then that was very, very, very expensive, and not a lot of people were doing that. So he convinced me to do it. I really liked the record. I really liked what they were doing. And we pressed the record and it didn't do well. So when they came and I had to show them their accounting statement and I had to go over their accounting statement with me, I remember Gabe almost like crying, man, because he was like, oh my God, we didn't make any money off this. I was like, dude, I took a bath on this record. We spent all this money and we still have thousands of copies in the warehouse. I think people at the time just weren't really ready for a record like that. Obviously now, Daptone and Sharon Jones went on to become a lot larger than life, but in the beginning it was a struggle. And that's how it is with a lot of, famous artists. They go through their hard times, they go through their struggles, and I happen to be there with a lot of things like this, yeah, I mean, I did a lot of early records with A-Track and Dave One from Chromeo. They had a label called Audio Research. They're both from Montreal. I've known both of those guys. I've definitely known A-Track since he was a young, I think he was in early 20s or maybe even late teens and stuff like that. And when he was working and doing the cuts on a lot of the Audio Research records, they had a group together called Obscure Disorder, which maybe some of you may know. And I also said another story about, one time A-Track was in New York and we went to the famous club Wetlands, and my boy Cutmaster Kurt was performing with Kool Keith, and I was like, Kurt, I'm with A-Track and he really is a big fan of Kool Keith. Do you mind if you put both of us on the list? And he did. And we're enjoying the show, and after the show, I come over to Keith and Kurt, and I was like, yo, Keith, man, this is my man, DJ A-Track. And he was like, oh, what's up, man? 8-Track, like the number 8-Track. And he kept calling him that, and to the point where A-Track was like, why is he calling me that? I was like, I don't know, man, it's Kool Keith, dude, he's crazy. Like, you wanted to meet him, so now you're meeting him. You know what I mean? Like, it was just bananas, like the whole night. I was like, I felt sorry for A-Track, because I don't think he knew that, Keith was gonna, pull his leg like that and play with him like that. But, that was it, And speaking of the club Wetlands, for anybody, any New Yorkers that may see this, because I'm gonna put it up on my YouTube channel later on. I used to go to Wetlands like a lot of other people. I've seen MOP, I've seen so many different people perform at Wetlands, and also just partying there, you know what I mean? It was a good time in New York, it was just a good time in music, period. There was so much great stuff coming out, underground wise, on the radio as well. Just a lot of music that now is considered classic. That was out and about. Yeah, man. I mean, I have a bunch of stories. Like I said, I always also used to work for Wax Poetics, and one of the records that I did for Wax Poetics was a Lyman Woodard Saturday Night Special record on Strata Records, which, by the way, I have the exclusive license rights to that label, which I've been reissuing. But this is way before I even met the owner of Strata Records or anything like that. And so when I'm at Wax Poetics, I was always said to myself, I was like, if I ever get a chance to reissue a record, I want to reissue that Lyman Woodard record, because it's one of my favorite records, and it needs a proper reissue. There was somebody in New Jersey who I'm not going to mention who was, bootlegging the record. It was like horrible bootleg. So nobody really had gotten a hold of him, and it was like this urban legend that Lyman was dead or the masters were gone, and so then I spoke to my boy at House Shoes, and I was like, Shoes, man, I want to try to get a hold of Lyman, man. Do you think that is there any way that I can get a hold of him? First of all, is he alive? And he was like, yeah, of course he's alive. I know his son, and I know John Sinclair and Lenny Sinclair and people like that. And so, one way or another, I got a hold of Lyman. And again, I was like, Lyman, I'm gonna fly to Detroit. I'm gonna take you to dinner, to your favorite, just name your favorite restaurant. I'll take you to your favorite restaurant. I really would like to do a reissue of this. And so I met him at a bar, at first, and he's sipping on his Jameson. He used to love Jameson. And then we drive to his favorite restaurant, which was like this, I believe it was like a seafood restaurant. And I'm with a friend of mine who worked with me. He was the graphic designer at Wax Poetics, Josh Dunn, who is actually from Detroit. So he was helping me, get around Detroit, and meet a lot of different people. And Lyman came with Ron English, who was another artist who's still alive from the Strata catalog, who played on a lot of Strata records, who had his own Strata record that I actually released 5 years ago that never came out until then. And he's just telling me stories about growing up in Detroit, and how Jimmy Smith was like his inspiration, and he used to play at this hotel in Detroit called the Shelby Hotel, and he'd be in the front in the lounge area playing and snacking on crawfish at the same time playing, stuffing his face and playing at the same time. And and then I asked him, I was like, yo, what's the story with the Saturday Night Special cover? Like that's just bananas covers. It's like such an iconic cover. And he was like, well, that was my gun, first of all, and that was my money in my clip. But I just threw out on the bedspread because I had just got in the hotel and I was like, let me just empty my pocket. And then Lenny Sinclair, who was with me, she came behind me and took a picture of that. And we were like, oh, that's actually kind of nice. I was like, okay. Because, everybody was trying to figure out what that picture was about, so that's just one of the great things of, being able to work at Wax Poetics. I got a chance to meet Mandrill, all the brothers, before. I believe one of them passed not that long ago, maybe a few years ago. Was trying to do something with them. I met the Mizell brothers, both of them, before they passed. We did something with them. I think it was the second Wax Poetics release. It was the Moments. They were in the original Moments, the group from, I believe, New Jersey. It's like a big Northern Soul record that was super, super rare. I think it's like 5,000 pounds if you have that kind of money to buy it. So we reissued it with a cover that I don't remember who did the cover, but it's a really nice cover. And they flew out from LA and they came and we did a release party for it. Bobby Humphrey came. I met her. It was amazing. I got to know Larry and Fonts. I was trying to do something with Larry and Fonts because they had produced for like Marvin and a bunch of other people stuff that never came out, and I was trying to put together a compilation of that for them, but for some reason it didn't work out. So yeah, I've had a full history of working in music, and different things like that. Trying to think of some other stories that might be interesting to people. Like I did the Fat Cat record with House Shoes and my man, rest in peace, Mike Huckabee. That's how I met Mike Huckabee, is through House Shoes, and they were both working at the store Record Time, which was one of my accounts when I first started, at Fatbees, one of my first retail accounts that I used to sell to all the time. And Shoes calls me one day and he's like, I got this record that Dilla did. Well, he called him JD back then, but I want to see if you like it. So he sent me a test pressing on the record, and I was like, yo, this is bananas, dude. I want all of them. I want to be the one that introduces this song to the world, and that's what happened. I was so glad, and that's why that's not the only reason why me and Shoes have been always, for a long time. I mean, we've been good friends for a long time. That's my dude, man. He's a solid dude, man. He knows his music and stuff like that. And shout out to Shoes. I got a chance to meet YG early on. I believe he was working at a work. I can't even remember. YG, you're gonna have to tell me how we met, because that part I don't remember. But I know we've known each other since the late '90s. And I remember when J-Rock and Babu, they went to Japan on like a little tour or whatever, and while they're there, they're buying records and stuff like that, and they bought a couple of records from the group Slum Village, so I Don't Know and Players, and I think one other 12-inch was produced only in Japan. So those original 12 inches, if you have them, they're Japanese made, and so we commissioned them later on, J-Rock and Babu, to do a mixtape for Fat Beats. It was called the Bum Rush Brothers. And I remember when we first heard it, they had some Fat Beats exclusives on there, obviously, like the Show and AG full scale EP that nobody really had heard yet. I think the song when it was with KRS-One and Big Pun. And if you know that song, it's like they left the parts where like Pun is like in between words and stuff like that, because he had to catch his breath, and they left that in there, And it was funny because Babu or J-Rock was cutting up the parts. It was crazy, and but they also had I Don't Know on there, and I had never heard of Slum Village. And we were all in the office like, yo, who is this? What is this record? Like, this is bananas. I mean, the drums are off, you want to pick apart everything. But I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, so, I spoke to YG because I know he's from Detroit, and I knew he knew Dilla. And I was like, yo, please tell me you have a copy of that 12 inch. I don't know. He was like, well, I don't have that one, but I do have Players. So he sent me Players, and I still have that record to this day, and it has a note on it, from YG saying like, don't sell this record. It's number one, not number one, but like number 30 or whatever of how many pressed. And I kept the record. And it's like one of my favorite records in my collection. And whenever I would see Dilla, around, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, yo, that was my boy, we hung out all the time. But when we saw each other, we knew each other. The last time I saw him there was a big show at BB King's in New York in Times Square, and I was backstage. That was one of the perks of being, who I was at Fat Beats. I could easily get backstage, in the dressing rooms and with the artists and stuff like that, because I knew a lot of them anyways. And I remember when I was in backstage in one of the dressing rooms with Dilla, it was just me and him and his manager at the time. It was some dude, I don't remember his name. And when that dude left, Dilla was like, yo, fuck him, I want to do records with you again. And yo, here's my new number. And he was like, yo, by the way, I gotta tell you, that whatever latest on track that we had at the time, me and Connie, was like, that on track, let's say it's 4 or 5 or whatever it was, he was like, yo, that shit is crazy, dude. He was like, I made some beats off of that. I was like, and that to me was like the highest compliment I could ever have, because he instantly became one of my favorite producers, ever since like, the Far Side and stuff like that. But when he did, I don't know, with Slum Village, I was like, it's a wrap. He's definitely in the top 5 for me, So I got to know him through that, and I think the last time I saw him was our first time in Germany. Really, I came to Amsterdam in 2003 for the 7-year anniversary party for the store, for the Amsterdam store, and then me and my boy, we went to Cologne. We traveled on to Cologne, which is like only a couple hour train ride. It was my first time in Germany, and we went to go see, a Stones Throw show, and it was like Dilla and Madlib. Again, I got backstage, and I see Egon. He's like, yo, what the hell are you doing? I was like, you never know where I'll show up, brother. You never know where I might show up. So I'm there, and I'm talking to Dilla, and I could see at the time that he was, not really doing so well. You know what I mean? He seemed like he lost some weight, but he still was committed to doing the show and stuff like that. Me, him, and Madlib, we all hung out. And speaking of Madlib, when I first came to LA, and I hung out with Wolf, I took him to dinner, we met, and then there was another time, I came to LA just to hang out. Sometimes I would come to LA, as vacation time, and I stayed at their house in, I believe it was Highland Park, where they first moved, where the first Stones Throw office was at, and I stayed on the couch. I stayed in the couch, and me and Madlib were hanging out. We were talking about records and stuff like that. It was just like. And for me, that was normal, because at that time, I had already been working at Fat Beats for like maybe 4 or 5 years, so I knew everybody. I was, just surrounded by so much great music and so many great people in terms of music. And, so yeah, we used to hang, man. And, my man DJ Dust, who's another cat I used to know. And the way I met DJ Dust, is I knew Rob One. So I'm not sure anybody who's listening on this radio show right now who knows what Rob One is, but on my YouTube channel, I'm sure there are people from LA who know Rob One. Rob One was a legendary DJ and record collector. He was also a part of the CBS crew. Shouts to Mac One and everybody else from that crew. But one time, Rob One came to New York, and he came with Dust. And he was like, yo, this is my man Dust. I want you to, meet him. And me and Dust just got along really well after that. And so whenever I come to LA, I'm gonna hang out with him in his house in East LA. You know what I mean? He was doing the Root Down. I used to come to the Root Town a lot, man. The Root Town was one of the parties that I wish we had in New York, and he would give me shouts out. People in the crowd probably didn't even know who the hell I was, but, it meant something to me that my man gave me a shout, And I remember one time sitting in the lounge area, and there used to be this woman, Giovanna, that used to work for the Fat Beats LA store, and everybody used to like go gaga over her because she was really cute. And I didn't know who her boyfriend was, and so, her and I are talking, and then her boyfriend comes in, and it's Will I Am. And this is way before Will I Am was known to the public. I think he was still at Band Clan, if anybody knows any of their history. And he was dating her for like a long time. And I was like, oh, so this is the dude that everybody's all jealous about. I'm like, hey man, don't hate on the next man because, he's doing something that you can't do. So I used to hang out in LA a lot, and somebody else asked me on my IG story that do I have any stories from LA? And one of the biggest stories that I have from LA is that one time I'm be coming out there for a vacation. I'm in my hotel I used to stay at this travel lodge right up the street from the store, which was in Los Feliz, Vermont, in LA. And I get a call from the store one day, and I can't remember who it was, but dude was bugging. He was like, yo, Amir, you gotta come down here. We're getting threatened. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You act like I'm some enforcer dude. I'm skinny. What am I gonna do? And just to give some context to the story, we Fat Beats had commissioned or decided to do a show with Slum Village. I believe it was at the SIR studios in LA, and they were the headliners. And the deal apparently is that you're gonna get half the money up front, but also the part of the deal was that you cannot do a show 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after the show somewhere else. And what ended up happening is that they did a show, I think I think they did a show before our show. So the owner of Fat Beats found that out, and he was like, I'm not giving you the second half of the money. So their management and whoever the label was at the time, I think it might have been Good Vibes, I'm not even sure. I think it was Good Vibes. Whoever the label management and the management from the group, they were threatening the cats of the store, like, we're gonna come down there and we're gonna whoop your ass. So they called me like I'm supposed to do something. Like, well, they figured I'm from New York, so I must be tough. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So I remember we used to have a bench outside of the LA store, and I'm sitting there, and I got the dude's number, Tim, I believe his name was, and he was just going on about how like he's gonna beat everybody down, and it was just a bunch of madness. I don't think it was actually Tim. My bad, Tim. I don't think it was you. I think it was the guy from Good Vibe that was on the phone with me. And he's talking all tough. He's like, y'all get some gangbangers to come down there and this and that and the other. And I'm like, dude, like, why are you going to 10? And I'm telling him, like, you signed a contract, or they signed a contract saying that they would not do a show before or after, 2 weeks before or after. So they forfeit that money. That's not my bad. That's on you. You know what I mean? And so you can't, to irrational people, it's like you can't argue with a fool, because then you become a fool yourself. We're going back and forth, and then I'm finally like, all right, I'm gonna have to be in New York on you, even though I'm not original New Yorker, but I had to be in New York on you. And I was like, yo, the address is blah, 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 you know where we're at. I'm sitting right here on the bench right in front of Fat Beats. You can come anytime, I'm here. Obviously that didn't happen. Thank God that didn't happen. I went to the show later on, I got backstage, and I'm standing next to Bahamadia and Medusa, and we're watching them do Fall in Love. And that was like the craziest thing, because I'm on stage, but backstage, and I'm looking at the crowd, and the crowd is like jumping up and down and losing their shit. And I'm just like, wow, this is crazy, man. They just captured the energy of the whole crowd. And I haven't been to any of these new hip hop shows, like a Drake show or Kendrick Lamar, and any of that. So I don't know how any of that looks these days, but if it looked like anything like that back in the days, I can understand why people are really into them. You know what I mean? But that was a special time, even in LA. Just being out there. I remember another time there was we did some kind of anniversary party for the LA store, and so myself, Rock Raider, and the Ghetto Dwellers, Party Artie, and I forgot his partner's name. We all flew out there. AG was with us, and this is typical my boss. So he gets a rent-a-car company, some company I never heard of, nobody's ever heard of. We get to LA, and we're looking for the car so we can get in and go about our way. And the airport's like, there's no car company here called that. I don't know who you. And so we're sitting there and we're like, Joe, you being super cheap, this is what you get. You got robbed, and so now you got to pay twice, because now you got to go with Hertz or whoever else to get us there. And I remember just hanging out with Raider and just soaking up stuff from him and learning about his journey to DJing and just learning from DJing from him. That was the last time I also saw Rob One before he passed away. I forgot what he passed away from, but it was like in the early 2000s. He unfortunately passed, and for those who know that DJ Dust passed more than 10 years ago himself as well. So it's kind of like a crazy thing with them. But I want to give a shout out to my man Boogie Blind. I met Boogie Blind through Rock Raider. Raider was a homie, man. Like years later on, we were cool, man. We were definitely tight. I know he was upset when I left Fat Beats, because we used to kick it, man. I used to kick it with him. I'm trying to remember Mr. Sinister, Rob Swift, Total Eclipse. I knew all of them dudes, man. It was like such a pleasure to know all of them, And speaking of Fat Beats, I used to go to the ITF championships, which Fat Beats was involved in creating that, the owner, So I remember being at the battle when the Scratch Pickles actually battled the X-Men, which is like everybody, it's like a legendary thing, and I was in that club, whatever that club was. And it was like, wow, man, like just like I said, just being in a lot of these places, seeing all this stuff go on, I don't know how many of these stories are being told, and that's why I'm trying to do my due diligence and get these stories out here. And speaking of which, these are going to be part of my book, hopefully at some point in time, that I'll be able to put out in more detail of a lot of these stories, of my journey. And it's not just about, me working at Fat Beats or Wax Poetics or any other places I worked at, but it's also about, the 90s in New York, because I was there in a lot of this stuff, and that's how I met, like I said, Mos Def and Kweli, and, I met all these guys, That's how I knew, like, Cypher Sounds, and, Cypher Sounds used to work at Fat Beats, and, we were kind of cool at the time, and, we would help DJ Riz bring his records up, to the show at WNYU that he had with More and Mayhem, which was also another great show, along with Stretch and Barbito. They were for a while they were competing back and forth about who would have the best freestyles, the best artists on their shows and stuff. And I was up there like a fly on the wall, listening to all of that stuff. Another record that got produced at my old flat that I shared with the Vinyl Reanimators was the L Fudge record, What If. That's why Fudge is my man. Whenever I see him, I say what's up to him. And I know he used to come out here to Germany back in the days after that 12-inch, the tour. Him, Afu. Afu's another one that I know really well too. My man Jay Rue, who lives here in Berlin. What's up? So yeah, man. I hope that you enjoyed a lot of the things that I had to enjoyed, and also learned some things about the past in New York City, and I have a lot more to express, to share with people, yeah, man. I thank you for listening, and I thank you for tuning in. Like I said, I hope you enjoy it. I know it's some crazy times right now with everybody, especially in New York back home. All my family and friends, I'm praying every day that you guys are, safe, and that we can turn this around. But till the next episode, peace, y'all.